I would like to introduce Les Emery.
Good evening, and thank you. I feel a little contrite to start with, to say that in some respects we put you in this situation by consenting to something that didn't turn out to be what we thought we consented to. And we did so, I think, partly kind of worn down by an argument for public safety, which, is a kind of civic responsibility. But as it turns out, the project doesn't seem to be like that. It's much different than we expected. So, just in brief, that's why the apparent consent that was given in 2017 has been rescinded. But more to the point is that I confess myself to, at some point, feel disappointment that the citizens of Lake Oswego weren't going to stand up for their own park. Obviously, I was wrong. And so, for that, I am very grateful to see you all here tonight. Now, to get me here, a certain individual had to come and hunt me down. I was admittedly kind of dodging this issue. But the moment I saw Jen Hollybaugh appear where I had just moved to and thought nobody would find me, I knew that my mother was breathing down my neck. So it's amazing how one can be roused out of one's slovenly avoidance patterns by a very brief visitation of the past. And today I went to the park and saw with kind of new eyes, partly because I think of the obvious interest and care there is here for this place that was intended to be a reserve for the wild in all of us and in all of the world, for the nature that made us and sustains us in spite of our abuse of it, and for the renewal in life that can come to those of us who live in this technologized and urbanized world, if there are such places close to hand. The park has matured as an ecology in ways that I really hadn't imagined. I remember it as a kind of early second growth forest. And it's really reaching a mature state that has a lot more complexity, greatly more variety and species diversity. And it has become, in essence, an island of species variation, an ecotope that is a true reserve of nature's resiliency in this entire area, which is one of the reasons I hope you will defend it. And but let me take you back a little bit. I grew up in a house on the south side overlooking the Tuolumne River. And the property that constitutes the park belonged to the Cook family who lived on Stafford. And at one point, old Bill Cook came to my father and said, "John, you ought to buy this place." And he said, "I don't have any money." And Bill says, "That doesn't matter, just give me X amount a month." And nothing down. Hell of a deal. But when you don't have any money, it seemed like, any deal is a deal. But somehow my father decided he'd better do it, and he made this contract. And I think Bill's motive was to provide for his wife after his death. Mrs. Cook had polio and didn't even have a wheelchair. She got around the house with a dining room chair. So they were real old timers. But the point is that this place came into our family by this kind of intervention forced upon in a way. And over all the years, this was, not long after I came into this world, which is a long time ago. And this property was never part of our private space. It was always a kind of public space. And it turns out it had always been one, going back, as some say, to the native peoples who lived here. And that the pioneers used to go up there to picnic. Bill said there used to be strawberry fields up there in the meadow. And of course it has this sort of commanding sense of the entire region, which is a little bit obscured now because of the growth of trees particularly on the east side, where you have this magnificent view of Mount Hood. But then on the west side you overlook the valley in that direction. So I think there's something always been about it that's a communal place. And Bill had logged it, and last piece was logged in the 50s on the west side of the big stand of firs and faces south. And that has grown up, and the maples there are really, it's just gorgeous there. It was just very scrappy in the early years of my memory. So it's a much more enchanting place than it was. It's a much richer place than it was, and it will become more so if it is protected from intrusion. But going forward, what I ask of you, and I told this to the city today, and I said it to the director of parks, is that you see this property not just as a reserve, not just as your place to go and restore yourself from the tensions of modern life, but as a place where your children and the children of this community can be taught to view the world differently than my generation has viewed it, and to act differently than my generation has acted, that has brought about so much devastation to the biosphere and to the natural systems upon which we depend, even though we don't seem to notice it. And to use it as a primary educational context, as well as a place for the sort of vitality and restoration of private lives. That would be my suggestion as an extension of my mother's ethic, who was the primary motive for its creation as a park. And the last thing I'll say is just to understand why I think this is activated by the dead, is that my mother, Marjorie and Emery, had the most passionate feelings were for nature. She was empathetic and ethical, but she regarded humans as very deluded in their sense of superiority over the rest of life. And she wouldn't use the language I would, but she would have called us a lot of twits. Because we just don't get it. We don't get it. So, as I said, this place was a place we went into, we visited, we went there. I rode a horse up there at night and watched Sputnik go over back in the 50s, But lots of people did that. It wasn't like it was our private property. And I didn't really realize that till recently. It's just kind of the way it was. And long before it was a park, all kinds of people were coming and going there. I just talked to somebody who used to ride his motorcycle there. Right? But the point is, at this point, it's a real ecological treasure. And as such, there's this added opportunity to make it a place to teach stewardship and reverence for the natural world and humility to the modern mind. So that's my sort of conceptual push on my mother's sensibility. And my father, who was the kind of a shoot-from-the-hip entrepreneur who never had enough capital, and whose fortunes went up and down in life, knew what that was worth, that property. But for him, he would come home on Saturdays and go out and walk by himself with the dogs through all of this territory, which I didn't appreciate when I was that age, and I didn't go with him. And it took me years to realize this was essential therapy for him in dealing with the business world and the practical world and the financial realities, as it may be for some, have been for some of you. And he understood that, even though he looked at that hilltop and thought, that's a lot of capital. And so it's because of, it isn't just my mother's motive, Marjorie's motive, but it's this, even the entrepreneur always trying to figure out how to make a buck, having a different sense of what nature can be, gave him motive as well to part with that, the ownership of this territory for a very minor amount of cash, which didn't even come from the City of Lake Oswego, but came from the federal government for the water system that was installed. When we all knew that in the near future, the property wouldn't be worth a great deal more. There's no regrets. I don't think he ever had any regrets, except maybe there were a few moments, when he reached in his pocket and it was empty. Because in his case, his financial stability over time had to do with buying a property. When business went down, he had some property, he mortgaged the property. And to tell you the truth, when he died and I owned one of his drawers, he had mortgaged his home place 5 times and paid it off over 40-some years to keep going, right? So that's a little background. But that's not the point. I'm not trying to get sympathy for empathy or whatever. I want you to know that the motive really is that nature matters. And that I hope you carry that on in the community here. And I mean, for 20 years after this place was transferred to the City of Oswego, nothing was done to make it accessible to the public, which we had expected in the 70s. No trails, no signs, no parking. There's still very little. So I had talked to, I may have mentioned to the Director of Parks about greater access and an interpretive center and whatnot, something more like Tryon Creek. And that may be in the offing at Stevens Meadows. So, by all means, please try to prevent this particular development. And by all means, please protect the rest of your parks for similar reasons. But my big ask is beyond that you push in this community where there is so much wealth and privilege and potential influence on the rest of the state and the country, that young people develop a new ethos of their relationship with the natural world through these marvelous public spaces, natural spaces that you have access to in this area. Thank you.